Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR, and got a lot to talk about going on in the Big Ten. We got Big Jeff McMichael, with us once again here on Thursday night to share some of his interesting work over at Big Jeff's Football, where you can read all of his awesome work and everything over there. Jeff, before we get started, just go ahead and tell people where they can find your work at, where they can find you at on social media, all that good stuff.
Sure thing, JR. So you can see on the screen there on X, you have Big Jeff's FT ball for football. And then I have my own website, bigjeffsfootball.com. So most of the times for our podcast, when we talk about a certain topic, I'm going to have an article supporting what we talked about on my website. And in this case, I do as well on recruiting that you can find out there. I posted that earlier today on the Big Jeff's website.
There you go. So go read Jeff's content over there. Does a great job with his content there, and then you can also listen to us talk about one of his articles, some of his data, things like that. So if you are a data person, you are going to like these episodes with Jeff. He always brings a lot of data in to support what he's talking about, uses it kind of as the crutch. But we do also talk about everything else surrounding the data, why it might be that way. If there's any arguments against the data, we'll talk about that as well. Jeff, before we get started, we did get a super chat from Ryan, so we do want to honor that. Ryan, thank you so much for the super chat. $10. He said, maybe Fickle should try to be the wrestling coach instead of the football coach. I wish he'd stop wearing that stupid jacket vest that says TEAM team on it. Wisconsin is not OSU, he says. Ryan, I get your pain here, man. I would not be happy with what Luke Fickell has done so far at Wisconsin either. New year though, we'll see, possibly. And if I'm not happy with my coach, I'm probably not happy about certain clothing items and stuff like that either. That's just that's being a fan, right, Jeff? You start nitpicking everything and you say, "Yeah, get off the team. You're not a part of the team, right?"
Based on 2 years of results, I think he should get a new jacket as well. Yes.
Yeah, probably. So Luke Fickell, of course, the one in the thumbnail, he was just making a really, really interesting face, and I thought it was eye-catching, so we went ahead and put Luke Fickell in there. Ryan, thank you so much for the super chat. It is awesome to have you joining us and supporting the show like that. Philip is here, ILL, INI there for you, and then he says Fickell program is sickle. It is a Fickell program, and it is a little sick right now. So yeah, there's a lot of wordplay we could do there. So very good. Very good. Thanks for being with us, Philip. Don't know how many people we'll have tonight. I know the basketball game is going on right now in addition to everything else, but we will talk football regardless. I have my basketball on over here. I got my Jeff for football on right here, and we're ready to go. People are rolling in now. We got Dorian. Hello, guys. Hello, Dorian. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. Got to talk some recruiting today, Dorian, so hope you like. Yes, the Sweet 16 we got going on right now. Sweet 16, BYU and Alabama. I haven't checked on that game yet. We'll have to see. And then Brooks here says, no matter, Wisconsin will lose to Penn State. I think that's a pretty safe bet, don't you, Jeff?
Likely so, yes, especially this year.
Yeah, not looking good for Wisconsin this year. We'll see if Luke Fickell can turn it around. All right. Thank you so much. Oh, Bama up, Dorian says. Bama up. Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you, Dorian. All right, Jeff, we ready to get to the data?
Yeah, let's do it. So pretty exciting topic. We're going to look at historical Big Ten football recruiting rankings. You're going to see where your team ranks. So we're going to look at, we have two tables. This is the first one here. We have 10 years of historical recruiting data for all Big Ten schools. And this is based off the 247 Sports Composite rankings. So just so you know, it's a great ranking. It's kind of like averaging some of the most popular recruiting sites. So it includes 247 Sports, Rivals, ESPN, and it lists others. And I took that data, and instead of giving grades to these teams, I saw some things that stood out to make me want to put these teams in the category. So we're going to be talking about these teams in light of how they fall into 6 different categories. The other thing to note is the 4 new Pac-12 teams that came into the fold, came into the Big Ten this year. They're listed in bold here. So they're going to be in bold font. And what I did is I basically ranked in the Big Ten as if those 4 teams were in the Big Ten for the last 10 years, right? To kind of keep things simple. So, JR, if you go back to the other one where it's the Big Ten rankings, just so we can see, as an example, if UCLA were in the Big Ten back in 2016, believe it or not, they would have had the 4th rated class in the Big Ten. So this really makes things more apples to apples, I feel. It really gives us a feel for where historically these teams stand. Now, we're going to try to keep it under an hour. This is chock full of information. I mean, we could go several hours easily on this. So, JR, we're going to try to keep it to under an hour.
Every time we say we keep it under an hour, they beg for 2 or 3 hours. So,
Yeah,
the podcasters might say they can't listen for an hour, but Philip and John always want 2 or 3 hours.
I hear you. And it's a struggle, right? I mean, frankly, the Big Ten with 18 teams, right? It makes it tough, right? So we're not going to go in depth on 18 teams, but I do want to try to hit on every team a little bit at least. So let's get to it. So the first group is the elite recruiters. So there's 2 teams that fall into this class. It's Ohio State and Oregon. They're in the deep green rows you can see here. So you see 10 years of Ohio State ratings, right? Like Ohio State, when Urban Meyer came into the Big Ten in 2012, he changed the game when it came to recruiting in the Big Ten. I mean, he instantly took Ohio State to a whole different elite level. They were already good recruiters. And as you could see, Ryan Day has only continued that. I have the current coaches kind of boxed in to the right. I'll point out that Ryan Day just completed his 6th year. And then prior to that, Urban Meyer had the 4 years before that to the left of this kind of like solid line between 2019 and 2020. So we're going to talk about the current coaches and a little bit about the prior coaches to them. But the bottom line is Ohio State consistently number one. The only year under Ryan Day they weren't number one in the Big Ten was 2024. And then their average Big Ten recruiting finish is basically 1.4 over the last 10 years. And that really supports, not surprisingly, we also threw in a column, what is their 5-year overall winning percentage? So for Ohio State, they lead the Big Ten with an 86% winning percentage. So recruiting is vital to performance on the field. It doesn't always directly correlate, but it's extremely important, as you can tell from Ohio State. The only other thing I want to point out about Ohio State, they're really one of the big 3 national recruiting experts know it's Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia. They're the big 3. Now, Ohio State comes in 3rd, and JR, if you go to the other national slide, you'll see that. So again, top row, Day consistently allowing Ohio State to finish in the top 5. Ohio State's 5-year average nationally is 3.8. So they're, very consistent here. And, Bama is number 1. Georgia's number 2 nationally over the last 5 years. And Ohio State is number 3 for sure. And they're all those schools recruit nationally, across every state. And that's what makes them elite. Let's talk to the second elite program in the Big Ten. That's Oregon. So JR, switch back. That's right. So with the addition of Oregon to the Big Ten, Dan Lanning, they really have emerged, and they are the current biggest threat to Ohio State being the kings of Big Ten recruiting. And really going all the way back to Mario Cristobal's years from 2018 to 2021, he really took Oregon recruiting to a new level too. I mean, he had the class in 2019 that actually would have beat Ohio State, would have been number 1. But Lanning the last 3 years would have been 3rd in the Big Ten 3 years ago, then 1st 2 years ago, and then he was 2nd this most previous year. So the 5-year average for Oregon is 2.4. And their 5-year winning percentage is 79%. So again, strong recruiting results and strong results on the field. JR switched over to the national rankings. And if you could see here, prior to Lanning's recent 3 years with the program, he's basically taken Oregon from a top 20 like recruiter nationally to a top 10 recruiter. So the last 3 years, ninth in the nation, third in the nation, and fifth in the nation. Just super impressive. And, obviously they've got the Nike and NIL funding, all the different uniforms. I mean, Oregon has a chance to really, along with Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama, considered the top recruiter in the nation. So, JR, any comments, surprises from our elite two recruiters in the Big Ten?
No, not really. I mean, this is this is what I expected. These are two of the programs that have had the best NIL in the Big Ten, so they're going to be two of the programs with the best recruiting classes in the Big Ten. That's just, I mean, that's what recruiting is nowadays. It used to be a little bit more romantic. It used to be a little bit more, oh, I always grew up loving this school, and you do hear that a little bit nowadays, but for the most part, unless they are a 3-star recruit and they're not going to make that much money, or a 2-star recruit or something like that, and you're battling against a group of 5 teams, these recruitments are typically going to turn into who can pay me the most money, especially with revenue sharing coming in. Now, I do hope that revenue sharing fixes things a little bit there, gives it a little bit more of an even playing field, but there are still going to be some teams that prioritize recruits over other teams. So if say Zion Ely, Ohio State wants them, well, guess what? Maryland probably wants them a whole lot more because he would be a huge piece of their team. So with the allocated revenue sharing, Maryland might go after Zion Ely more with some of that money. I'm just using him as an example this year. We'll get to Maryland a little bit later on, but I do think that that's interesting there. And as far as I'm concerned, it's about money now more than anything, and that's how it's going to be probably moving forward, unless we get some kind of regulation or something from the NCAA, which I would not. This is the NCAA. You don't you don't want to hold your breath with them, but unless you get some kind of regulation or something, this is just the way it's going to kind of be here for a little while. I will say, even if there is some kind of regulating, you best believe that if things are not properly managed and things are not properly looked at, the bag man will return in the SEC, and you will see a lot of these recruiting numbers for teams like Oregon. Now, not so much the same because, excuse me, they got better with their NIL and stuff like that, so they'll probably remain up there. But you'll see a lot of these numbers start to go down again because as we know, the SEC will utilize the bag man. They will pay recruits whether it's legal or not, and that will affect things. But we have another episode on the Big Ten versus the SEC, so I don't want to get into that too much.
We will. So let's jump into our second category. So I'm calling these top 20 recruiters. They're in the light green, so rows 3 and 4 here. So that's Michigan and Penn State as of now. Michigan clearly comes in third, although Penn State is close.
I apologize, Jeff. Can I interrupt really fast?
Yes.
We just had a couple people say a few things in the chat, and I forgot to bring those up. So let's get to the chat really fast, and then we'll continue on. Philip says, how much do you account for player retention and transfer portal addition? I think this is interesting, Jeff. So I'm curious your thoughts. My thoughts are, if you are being run well and being run efficiently, you put a whole lot more into recruiting than you do transfer portal. But if you are a team that you just got a new coach and you're trying to bring players in like a Kirk Cinetti, I almost guarantee you Indiana has spent a whole lot more on the transfer portal right now than they have on recruiting. Now, could that change eventually? I'm sure that will change eventually, but at least for right now, Indiana, they're not going to win 11 games again with the talent that they had before. They have to go into the portal and get some talent, Fernando Mendoza, Roman Hemby, some of those other guys. And so that's what's going to bring them there. But other programs like Illinois, right? They were steady. They built with the recruiting and stuff like that. They go into the portal sometimes and get some guys. So it just kind of depends on where your program is at. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I would just say this is definitely just pure high school level recruiting. Bring in the transfer portal. I'll actually probably do a future one where we'll look at that too, along with the high school. But for purposes of not trying to overwhelm people with data, I didn't want to do that here, right? I would maintain, though, that, as a Florida State even learned, yes, you can, through the portal, really supplement a roster and have great success, but it can be fleeting. And we found that out. They went, from 12-0 one year in the regular season to 2-10. And so the best teams know, especially in football, with the number of players you need, and it's different than basketball where, grabbing one or two players out of the portal can just make an amazing difference. You need more than just one or two players in football. So having a solid base, if you will, of good high school recruiting is going to be very important for long-term stability of your program, is what I would maintain.
For sure, for sure. And transfer portal rankings are kind of difficult to deal with. I think recruiting rankings are a whole lot better to rely upon. Transfer portal, we're still trying to figure that out a little bit because there's teams that do really well in the transfer portal and then they don't. And like you said, Florida State, they did really well in the transfer portal and they got way worse. So how does that always work out? It's really, really interesting. Brooks is also pointing out that Ohio State isn't a city. They have Fortune 500 companies. Other places are screwed. It definitely does help to be in a city. You have some more opportunities for NIL there. Maybe some more people. And also, I don't think people realize this so much, but with Ohio State, there's a lot of companies, restaurants, bars, stuff like that require Ohio State to be good to keep them in business. So they're going to do whatever they can to try and keep the Ohio State football team good, because if they're not good, people are out less often going to football games, which means they're coming to your restaurant a whole lot less often, or they're going to get drinks a whole lot less often, or, they don't want to watch the big game, so they're not going out to someplace. It is an interesting concept there. So any thoughts on the cities and the companies and stuff like that, Jeff?
I mean, not big other than I do think it offers more NIL opportunities, certainly appealing for bigger cities. I think another factor here, why recruiting still going to matter, is if you can show that you can produce NFL talent, that's going to be very attractive. So some families really look at the long term. Yes, NIL matters, but what school is going to develop me to allow me to get to the NFL where I can make some big time money, much more than you could from like short-term NIL funding. And then there's niche programs, right? There's Iowas of the world who show they're a tight end factory. You come to Iowa, we're going to produce great offensive linemen and defensive backs that make it to the NFL. So NFL production is a big thing. And I can guarantee we will be talking in future episodes about what schools are best at generating NFL prospects and by position. It's going to be pretty compelling as well. But that's future topic.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one. I remember us talking about that. That's going to be a fun episode. And then, of course, as soon as we were talking about recruiting, I thought Mike might be in here reminding us. He says, "How about PJ going in and stealing the top player out of Wisconsin for the second time in 3 years?" Gavin, is that Mailer commits to Minnesota over the in-state Badgers and others. I mean, this is what happens in recruiting. You can have a really strong program, but if you fall off for a year or two, your recruits are in danger of going elsewhere. PJ Fleck, like we have pointed out, he has done a good job of getting players to the league. And so if it's between Minnesota and Wisconsin and they're offering competitive NIL with each other, guess what? If I was an offensive lineman, I might be looking a little bit more at Minnesota too, because PJ Fleck has shown that he can get you ready for the NFL, and Luke Fickell has shown that right now, Wisconsin's on a little bit of a downturn. So it's just even that much more important to make sure that you keep a solid program, because stuff like this, or Meyer, Philip says, I apologize, Meyer, it's just that much more important. So any other thoughts there, Joy, before we move on?
So I'm going to go off script here because he mentions Minnesota. Let's just talk Minnesota right now. So Minnesota wrote. Well, actually, go to the prior one. Go to the Big Ten one first, just briefly. But if you look at Minnesota, so their 5-year average recruiting rank in the Big Ten is 13. So they rank 13th overall out of 18 teams in recruiting. That's not very good, right? Their national 5-year average rank, you don't have to go to that one, but it's 43. So they're 43rd in the nation. And by the way, there's 134 Division I teams. So that's not really good. But look at their 5-year win rate, 59% winning rate. And in fact, Minnesota hasn't even had a top 10, well, one 10th ranked class in 2024. Other than that, they're in double digits and really in the second half of recruiting. But it shows that the Big Ten has development programs in allowing a program to overperform on the field relative to their recruiting. And that's the definition of what Minnesota is for sure under PJ Fleck, right? Very good developer of talent. They know who they are. They have a strong culture too, so that they can recruit to that talent. And then, yeah, they're going to steal, a couple players or retain a couple key players. That safety that Ohio State almost got from them. JR maybe can help me out with his name. The Minnesota fan would
Coy
know.
Parrish.
Sure.
Yep.
Coy Parrish, right? So little difference making players like that. But Minnesota is the type of program they're going to recruit to their culture and to their strength. They're going to have them for 4 and 5 years, and they're going to win a lot of football games with them, right? The definition of what I'd call an overperformer.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, these are the type of programs and these are the type of coaches that do a really good job of not just looking at 40 times, not just looking at arm length and stuff like that, but saying what does this player do well and how can we utilize them in our system? And Minnesota has done a very good job of that. There's other programs here that are highlighted in blue. I know you'll talk about here in a second that do a good job of that as well. So as far as I'm concerned, you get to a program like Minnesota, and also let's also just be frank, Wisconsin and Minnesota are not scouted like other states are, right? There are a whole lot more scouts down in Florida than there are up in Wisconsin and Minnesota. So there's going to be guys up there that maybe go under the radar or maybe don't go to every single camp and the scouts don't see as much, but they're still good football players. They're still coachable and they can still go to a program and develop and turn into something. That's how you get the guys at North Dakota and South Dakota too, right? That's how it goes. And for all we know, somebody could be a really good hockey player, put on a few pounds and say, I'm going to be an offensive lineman or I'm going to be a tight end or something like that. And then they turn into something because, like I said, they're coachable, they're athletic, and they can turn into something.
All right, let's go. Good stuff. But let's go and let's talk about the top 20 recruiters. So the first one up is Michigan there in row 3. Definitely third best historically in the Big Ten. Their 5-year rank of 3.8 is a little bit better than Penn State's 4.4. The last 10 years, they've only fallen outside the top 5 in the recruiting ranking only once. That was 2018. And I would term Michigan as consistent, but not elite. They do have the second best Big Ten 5-year winning percentage, though, right? So 81%. And obviously, with the huge years that Jim Harbaugh had his last 2 or 3 years at Michigan, help with that. Let's go look at nationally, JR, to that table. So you're going to see that Michigan's a top 20 recruiter nationally for sure. They only fell outside the top 20 only once the last 10 years. That was in 2018. So very consistent. And in fact, they've been top 10 6 of the last 10 years as well. So Michigan has a chance to even be a little bit better. Their 5-year average national rank is 12.2, which is third best in the Big Ten. But really promising, Sharon Moore, his first class this year, his first real class, a number 6 ranking. That's the second best national ranking for Michigan over the last 10 years. So it's really promising. I'm noticing that with Michigan's recruits, much more stronger national presence, going up against your Georgias, Alabamas, and Ohio States of the world more often, right? And so they've really raised their profile. And Sharon Morris has a chance to maintain that. He just needs to win on the field now to keep that momentum going. Let's go to Penn State next. So very close behind Michigan. They're basically the 4th best recruiting program in the Big Ten. Over the last 10 years, they've only finished outside the top 5 just twice. And then their average over 5 years in the Big Ten is 14.2. Average is 4.4. If you go to the prior one, JR, go to the Big Ten table. They have a 4.4 average ranking. So you know, consistently in the top 20. Also, if you look nationally, they're consistently top 20. Uh, and I think what you notice from Penn State, the bottom line is good but not great recruiting. They are overall 14.2 is their national average. So 14th rated in recruiting. And when you think about what Penn State has done, they've always been outside of being able to do the 14 playoff, good enough to beat the good teams, but not the great teams. This is why the 12-team playoff is huge for them, right? You saw it this past year, they made it. They're not recruiting to that level where they were going to make a 14 playoff very often, but they certainly can make a 12-team playoff. And the other factor is, though, they've struggled against top 5 and 10 Big Ten teams. One of the reasons is they're not recruiting like a top 10 team. They're just outside of that. So you're going to see Penn State, you would expect, come up a little bit short against your Ohio States of the world, even your Michigan of the world. And that's exactly what's happened here. The difference this year, though, is they've retained a lot of players that would have went pro last year, right? So that's why this is a huge opportunity for James Franklin to kind of break down that door, break down the stereotype, and maybe break into the top 10 in recruiting, where he's going to need to be if he wants to consistently or maybe go 500 at least against an Ohio State. He's going to need to do that. You know, we all know if you look at Penn State's winning percentage, 5-year winning percentage, it's 70%. Again, good, but not great, right? In the reason it's not better, he's 4-17 against Michigan and Penn State, right? That's the thing holding him back. So fourth clearly in the Big Ten for Penn State. Jer, any comments on Michigan, Penn State as top 20 type programs in recruiting?
Yeah, really interesting. Michigan and Penn State. Michigan kind of been up and down a little bit. There's another team that we'll mention here in a second that's been up and down a little bit, but their winning percentage is about 20 percentage points lower over the past 5 years. So I think that does make a difference. It also speaks to the coaching that those two teams have had. But Michigan, I mean, this is one of the things that you were expecting was going to happen with a Sharon Moore, right? A young, energetic coach in Sharon Moore. You worked hard to get NIL in a good place with him, and that happens. So once you do that, it's not uncommon that you're going to find the second best recruiting class in the past 10 years for Michigan happens in his very first year. Combine that with a recent national championship as well. This is what it's going to bring for Michigan. And now I think the goal for Michigan is, can they crack the top 5, right? They just got number 6. Can they crack the top 5? Can they be in there? Can they be around the top 5 for a few years? It's very, very competitive recruiting now in the Big Ten, especially amongst these 3 or 4 top programs, especially with certain players, and very competitive NIL. Michigan has good NIL, Oregon has good NIL, Ohio State has good NIL, and there's other factors that make that good as well. Penn State for me is interesting, kind of been close to 15, 20 a few times, also get down to 6 a couple times there. So that does spell good for them, but you're right. I mean, this is a team in Penn State that they need to hit that next level, and they probably need to do that in recruiting before they do that on the field. Or if they could do it on the field first, they're probably going to need a little bit of a drop off from somebody like Ohio State in order to make that happen. If they can make that happen, that'll be huge for them. But Penn State also runs the disadvantage of being in what's it called, state college or college, yeah, state college.
Very small town.
Very small town, hard to get to. It's not like it's right there close to the airport, so that can make things a little bit more complicated for recruiting visits. But James Franklin has done the best he possibly could to try to do that stuff for Penn State. Not in the most talent-rich state in the world. I mean, it's still a good state for high school football. Not the most talent-rich state in the world. It's not Georgia. It's not Florida. In a small town, for him to be right around top 10, top 15, outside of top 15 only 2 or 3 times, it's impressive what James Franklin has done.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Should we go to the next category, or do we have any comments we want to hit?
Oh, let's see. Got Daniel commenting a good amount. Let's just bring one up from Daniel. Says, in theory, every bottom feeder pays NIL to 1 or 2. That's 15 to 30 players Ohio State and Michigan don't get. So he's saying if the teams in the lower part of the Big Ten could just get their NIL together and get one or two players, that would be 15 or 30 players that Ohio State and Michigan wouldn't get. I mean, possibly there is also the aspect of NFL development and stuff like that, like Jeff mentioned. So that's there as well. But you're right, Daniel. I mean, if all these teams got everything together, that would certainly be something that could impact things.
Yeah, I think these
Um,
bottom teams need to strategically say if there's one position that's really holding me back, and it needs to be a premium position, obviously, like it's quarterback, it's defensive end,
right.
it could be a great cornerback to fill a hole. That's where they need to be strategic and just say, we're going to just pay up and just get a guy, right? Right. They're just not going to be
Right.
able to do it across the board. And then hopefully combine that with an experienced team. And then you can have a really amazing year potentially, but kind of like a one-off.
Correct. Correct. And Brooks also brings up, he says, how do you fix a school that has to pay NIL for 29 D1 programs, but you say have Alabama, who only has 9 D1 programs? That's a lot of money for football. Everyone else, football is number one. Yeah, I mean, this is part of what happens in the Big Ten. The Big Ten has some other sports that they allocate funds a little bit more often. The SEC kind of has baseball, basketball, and football. Football's number one for all those programs, but in the Big Ten, you have some programs that, want to pay their basketball more. You have some programs that, I mean, hockey is a big thing for a number of Big Ten programs. It's probably not the most, but they do pay a good amount there. I mean, you look at Penn State, Iowa; those programs are spending money on their wrestling program in addition to other stuff. So, I mean, then you have the gymnastics and everything else. It's the same issue that Stanford ran into with NIL there for a while, and I don't know if they've got that figured out yet. I don't follow Stanford close enough, but I remember them talking about it a little bit. So, any thoughts on the large amount of D1 programs in the Big Ten versus the smaller amount in other conferences, Jeff?
I just think every Big Ten school has their niche and beyond football. I mean, you need to be good in football though. So you got to, and all the other programs will get it. They're going to get the bulk of the funding. And then it's up to the school to decide, well, which niche areas are we going to be strong in? I went to Indiana, so we are always really strong in soccer, really strong in swimming, certain sports, baseball, not so much really, right? And I think you could go school by school in the Big Ten and find that there's not many that are good across the board. Ohio State's probably might be one of the better ones in the Big Ten of being good across the board. But you got to fully fund football. That's the money driver, and everyone knows it.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing from certain programs right now is they're saying, look, even if we don't give as much to our basketball program, our football is going to make more money, which is going to fund everything for
Yep.
us. And so you have to give more money to football to make money for some of the other ones. So it is what it is. So all right, let's get back to the chart here, Jeff. Where would you
Yep.
like to go
Go,
next?
go to the Big Ten one. So our next category, what I'm calling underperformers. So these are where teams where their records on the field, their wins and losses, are underperforming their recruiting rankings. And so there's 3 of them here. There's USC, Nebraska, and Maryland. So it's in light tan here. So we're going to cover USC first because they're the highest rated one. Their 5-year Big Ten average recruiting rank is 6.2. So that's good for the 5th best in the Big Ten. From a national perspective, their average rank over the last 5 years is 23. However, their 5-year win percentage is only 60%. So think about that. Their USC is recruiting like a top 25 program, but they're only winning 6 of 10 football games. That's a big disconnect, right? And we know, for USC under Lincoln Riley, the biggest culprit, I guess I would say, is the lack of enough talent or success on defense. But that's why everyone's really kind of shocked, given his pedigree and given the still solid recruiting by USC. It is surprising that they haven't done better. They've finished in the top 5, 7 of the last 10 years in the Big Ten. They have had a couple clunkers, though. So under Clay Helton in 2020, they finished 16th. And then 2 years later in 2022, finished 17th. So 2 bad classes out of 3 years really hurts you. And I think you do see that in USC's play. They got some really good players, but they don't have the depth you need to go against the big guys in the Big Ten. So they really need to address that. Nationally, USC has finished 8 of 10 years in the top 20, so that's great. But again, a couple bad years from the Clay Helton. Riley's last three classes. So go to the national table, JR. His last three classes have ranked nationally in row 5. They're 8, 17, and 14. That's top 20. It's good, but let's face it, with Lincoln Riley, that's pretty underwhelming, don't you think? USC, we talked about it's in a big city, NIL opportunities. I mean, he's really under-recruited so far, and that's kind of a disappointment. I know they've made recent changes to their admin staff focused on recruiting, and I think in some recruiting services, their 26 class is off to a great start, and some have them number 1 so far. Now it's early, but I do think going forward, you're going to see USC with better recruiting classes, but clearly they've underperformed on the field versus their recruiting. Let's talk about the next one, Nebraska. So they're our second underperformer. They rank 6th best in the Big Ten. Their 5-year average is 7.4. Their national average is 25. So over the last 5 years. So they've been recruiting at about the top 25 level, right? But look at their winning percentage, 39% for the 6th best recruiting team in the Big Ten. That is horrible. And really, the lack of player development, and frankly, that figure of 39% is driven by Scott Frost and his abysmal record in one-score games. So he's 5-22, Scott Frost was, in one-score games, despite having consistently good, solid recruiting classes, right? That were ranked 20, 17. I mean, really solid stuff. So under Matt Rule, you're seeing, and let's go to the national one slide, JR, for Nebraska. It was national. Yeah, 18th and 22nd. So really solid there by Matt Rule. I do expect them to improve here. But the bottom line is, with the recruiting that Nebraska is able to maintain, there's no reason they shouldn't be winning at more like a 66% rate. They should be like having 8-4 seasons consistently, maybe going 9-3, maybe a 10-2 with a experienced quarterback like Dylan Raiola by the time he gets to his junior year. But really, they've been the biggest underperformers of all the Big Ten schools here. The third one we're going to go back to the Big Ten rankings here, is Maryland. And JR's favorite, Mike Locksley. So they're 7th in the Big Ten in recruiting with a 5-year average of 8.4. Nationally, their 5-year average is 29.6, so about, top 30 level recruiting. But their winning percentage has only been 52% over the last 5 years. So again, to me, that says they are not playing on the field to their recruiting level. And if you think about it, that really supports the perception of Locksley and his staff, right? They can recruit well, but they really do not develop the talent sufficiently. They don't retain the talent. And certainly in game planning and coaching, that's where they fail. And they're also in a region where, Northern Virginia, Baltimore, Washington, ripe with a lot of really good high school football. So I think now that they're no longer in the Big Ten East, we're going to find out here in the next year or two if Locksley's going to make it or not, because there's really no excuses now that they're out of the Big Ten East. So that was Maryland. So those were my 3 underperformers. JR, any comments on them?
No, I think you got them right. I do think USC has fixed some things. Chad Bowden coming in from Notre Dame, and they also got the general manager from Wisconsin. I mean, obviously, they're, like you said, they're number 1 in recruiting in some different sites and stuff like that right now. So obviously, they're doing something right there. My biggest thing with USC is just kind of like wait and see. Let's see if they can hold on to these recruits, because this has happened not quite to this level, but this has happened with USC before, where they've gotten really good recruits and then they have left, for Georgia or whatever else, because USC seems to be one of these programs that, is aggressive with the NIL early, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's just when you're aggressive with the NIL early, there are opportunities for other teams to kind of swoop in late and you take your recruits away from you. So to me, bringing in Chad Bowden, the general manager from Wisconsin, I think that's going to help them, actually be able to do better during the season. Lincoln Riley seems to be able to recruit very well outside of the season, but as we've documented on this show before, he calls plays. He's basically the offensive coordinator. He's the head coach. Just got too much going on. So the general manager hires, I really like them by USC. Can they hold on to some of these top tier players that they have committed right now? I would venture to say yes. I think USC is going to be a top 10 recruiting class at the very least, probably maybe even top 5 this season, but we'll see where they get to there. And then you're spot on about Nebraska. The Scott Frost age just absolutely destroyed their winning percentage. The 3 years prior to these last two, the recruiting has been more consistent under Matt Rule, which I think is better, but he's also supplementing with the transfer portal at the same time. So I don't think he is, going full fledged into recruiting as maybe he will in 3 or 4 years from now. If they can get to that level. I think Dylan Raiola was a huge get for them. That really helped kind of solidify their program. And it was really not the only reason, but one of the big reasons why they were making why they were able to make a push for David Sanders. And then, I don't know. I mean, I've given my thoughts on Maryland recruiting so many times at this point.
Yeah.
Mike, you hit the nail on the head, Jeff. Mike Locksley can recruit. He does a good job getting players in there. In fact, he'll send players to the NFL. But for whatever reason, he just can't put it all together. It was really disappointing to me. The first year out of the Big Ten East, what do? They win one Big Ten game. And it was the one game where USC came to Maryland and they had to play them at Maryland. They had a huge advantage there. They took down a USC team that was struggling this season in close games, and they won. So good for Maryland on that, but I would have liked to see more from them their first year out of the Big Ten East. Maybe we'll see more from them this season. If they do, great. But so far, it's not looking good.
Very good. Should I jump into the next section?
Couple comments by a few people. We got Trojan Fight here. Hello, Trojan Fight. He says, said we had some NIL struggles until recently. Yeah, and I mean, sometimes it's just figuring out the NIL too, right? How to use it and how to have it the right way. So you can get NIL, but use it the right way. I think Chad Bowden's going to be huge for them on that. Mike says Locksley can't even pay to keep his QB. Locksley isn't a great coach, but I don't have any idea who can win at Maryland when you can't afford to pay and retain your best players. That's another piece of it too. They have lost some of their really good recruits to a Penn State and some other schools, and so if you can recruit really well, that's good for you. But if you lose Chop Robinson to Penn State or whatever, like other recruits, it doesn't do a whole lot of good for you to pay them and come to your school if they're just going to leave after a year or two. So Mike Locksley's got to find a way to hold on to his guys. So good point there, Mike. All right, Jeff, want to get to who do you want to get to next?
All right, so if you go to the Big Ten table, so we're going to talk about overperformers. So this is more of a positive take. So these are where their records on the field are overperforming their recruiting. There's 5 teams here: Iowa, Washington, Minnesota, Illinois, and UCLA. So this is light blue shade. And so let's talk about Iowa first. They're the biggest overperformer by far. So led by 26-year coach Kirk Ferentz. Their Big Ten 5-year average recruiting rank is 9.6. So that's 8th best in the Big Ten. And their national 5-year average rank for recruiting is a solid 33rd in the nation, right? Good, but not great. But their 5-year winning percent is 68%. That's 5th best in the Big Ten. So they are far exceeding on the field their recruiting rankings, which really supports Ferentz's and his staff's reputation of being great developers of talent, knowing their culture, recruiting to that culture, and consistently winning. It also explains why Iowa struggles beating the best teams, right? Their top 20, I don't have the stat, but their top record against top 25 teams is very poor. They just don't have the level of elite skill player and the quantity of skill players to compete with the top teams. So it's mostly a good story, but it's a little frustrating. I know for Iowa fans, why can't we win, top 25 games? And the recruiting does partially explain that. The other good news for the Hawkeye fans is that recruiting is trending in a good direction. The last 5 years for France is better than the previous 5 years. So really, and this was mentioned earlier, there's certain positions that I would just develop so well. Offensive and defensive line, tight ends and defensive backs. They've shown they can put you in the NFL. We have good coaches. We can help you get there so that you can make the big money. So as long as France is there, I expect this to continue, right? They're going to struggle against the biggest teams because they don't have that elite recruiting, but they're going to continue to win a lot of football games. So that's Iowa. So let's talk Washington. The Big Ten newcomer, their 5-year average recruiting ranking is only 11.8. That's 12th best in the Big Ten. Their national 5-year average is 44. So Washington's about 44th in the nation on average. And yet their 5-year win rate is 67%, right? Now, some of that, they are in that's a 5-year win rate. So 4 of the 5 years was in the easier Pac-12 conference. And it also includes and is brought up by going 14-1 in 2023 when they made the championship game against Michigan. But nevertheless, they are over performing against those recruiting rankings. They did have a clunker class in 2022, 95th ranked under Jimmy Lake when he the transition from him to Kalen DeBoer. But if you look at what's really cool about Washington, if you look back to 2016 to 2020, which was under Chris Peterson, his recruiting rankings were like 15th, 2019. He had 3 top 20 finishes. So it's clear to me that Washington under Jed Fish has a clear opportunity to return to being a top 25 like recruiting program. But for now, we're going to put them under the overperformer category. We talked about Minnesota already as an overperformer, so I'm not going to cover that one again. Illinois is another big one. Brett Bielema, he's entering his 5th season in Champaign. It's interesting. They finished 16th in the AP poll. All the too early preseason top 25s have them ranked up there. You would think their recruiting over the last 5 years would reflect, better recruiting for Illinois. Not so much, really. Their last 5 year, their average in the Big Ten, and go the prior one, JR, for the Big Ten table, 13.6 is their average Big Ten ranking. And that's actually tied for 14th place in the Big Ten with UCLA. Bielema's best Big Ten finish was number 11 in 2023. In the 2025 class, most recently, only finished 12th. Nationally, Illinois only ranked 50th in recruiting over the last 5 years. So it's pretty amazing to me. If you look strictly at recruiting, you would say there's no way this team is going to be in the top 25 for a couple years in a row. But that's exactly what Illinois is going to do. And it really speaks to his player development, developing a culture, knowing how to win, knowing how to game plan. And it's pretty impressive, frankly. I mean, their 5-year win rate is only 52%, but that's going to improve, I think, here as Bielema has gotten his legs under him, so to speak. And then finally, UCLA is our final one here. The main reason they're an overperformer, frankly, is Chip Kelly. He ran the program from 2018 to 2023. The 6 main classes under Kelly's realm were no better than 10th in the Big Ten. And then he had a couple clunkers too. He was 16th in 2022 and 18th in the transition year from Kelly to Deshaun Foster. So the 5-year average for UCLA in the Big Ten is 13.6. So that's 14th. And then nationally, they're 53rd in the nation. So not very good. But despite that, UCLA won a decent amount of games, 58% winning rate over the last 5 years. It really supports Kelly's reputation that he didn't really give a damn, frankly, about recruiting, wasn't good at it. He's a ball coach, right? He wanted to create game plans, execute the game plans. So he actually kind of overachieved at UCLA, even though UCLA fans would tell you they weren't happy with the overall results. He just didn't recruit nearly at the level he needed. Deshaun Foster in his first class, from a national perspective, it came in ranked 46th, 13th in the Big Ten. So it's too early to tell how he's going to do recruiting wise. I do think, though, UCLA will do better than Chip Kelly, who is kind of, didn't care that much about recruiting. Potentially could have top 30 classes for UCLA. They certainly did back similar to Washington. If you look at UCLA, go to the national one here briefly, JR, the national table. Jim Mora back in 2016, 2017, 2018, nationally, they finished 13th, 20th, and 19th. It's possible at UCLA, you got to line the NLL to be a top 25 like program. They are in the big city of LA, lucrative recruiting base in California. But UCLA is my final. The 5 teams are overperformers. JR, any comments on those 4 since we already covered Minnesota?
Yeah, I find it interesting. We'll get to Indiana here soon with how close Indiana and Illinois are. Indiana obviously with the spectacular season last year, but Illinois, for Brett Bielema to come in and instantly start giving this program top 50 classes when they only had one the 6 years prior to Brett Bielema coming in, that really speaks to his ability to come in, spot talent, recruit them, and bring them into his program. So Brett Bielema, although the numbers are not, are not anything eye popping, they did improve. They are getting better over the 6 year prior to it. Only one top 50 class prior to this year, and they even got top 40 in 2023. So we'll see what they end up this year. I think they're still in the top 10 in recruiting this year. They probably won't stay there, but there's hope this year for Illinois to have a top 20, top 25 class, and that would be really, really big for Illinois if they're able to make that happen. UCLA, you're spot on. I mean, top 20 classes the 3 years prior to Kelly, and then Kelly comes in, and it's like, okay, we'll be outside the top 30. Okay, 61st, it is what it is. Oh, back to 37th.
Brutal.
Okay, 90. Like,
Yeah.
this is just kind of what Chip Kelly was. Didn't really want to recruit. Didn't really want to go out and focus on that. Just wanted to coach ball. And this was an NFL coach who was in college football who wanted to basically be in the NFL, and he eventually got himself there after going to Ohio State to be the offensive coordinator. Good for him. UCLA, as much as he could coach a team up on the field, it was very frustrating for UCLA to not be able to get the good players, and also not to have the NIL in a very good spot. I think that speaks to Deshaun Foster's first season a little bit. Not the best recruiting. He's going to have to work on getting that NIL up there a little bit more and help out in that area. Already commented on Minnesota, so I'm not going to say really anything on them. Washington, good recruiting before. Then they had Kalen DeBoer. Then now they have Jed Fish. Jed Fish seems to be bringing them back to kind of that good recruiting they were at before. Biggest thing with Washington is they just need to find a coach and hold on to him. Washington's done a good job of hiring good coaches over the years. They just got to find one and hold on to them however they do that. It is a tough place to recruit at, so I do think that impacts things a little bit. I thought Kalen DeBoer was going to be their guy. He seemed like the guy that was going to be their guy, but he went on over to Alabama, and it is what it is. Last one, Iowa. You mentioned how Iowa's been better in the past 5 years. That's really ever since Kirk Ferentz started getting himself in Florida more. There was kind of a push in the last 5 years for Kirk Ferentz to start recruiting the state of Florida a little bit more. They're not necessarily going after the big fish there, but they are going after better players, more athleticism in some cases, some 3-stars there that, maybe they are not that much higher ranked than some guys in Iowa, but they do bring a level of athleticism. And when you have Kirk Ferentz, who is a good developer of talent, he can do some work with those guys. So good on Iowa there.
Good stuff. Any comments to highlight from the audience?
Doreen says, nice breakdown, guys. Thank you, Doreen. Let's see. Few comments. Mish thinks Washington is going to fall off. I do think this is a bit of a prove it year for Washington. They need to, Jed Fish needs to prove it with himself. He went 6-6 last year, but that Washington State loss was not great. So does need to prove it this year. Otherwise, they could find themselves on a little bit of a downturn, and that's not what you want with the Washington program. And then Pit Snipe Husker, thanks for being here. Pit Snipe Husker, he says, with Schiano back at Rutgers, I think it's best not to underestimate them. They're going to win one or two. They shouldn't and ruin somebody's season. Yeah, I mean, this is what Greg Schiano is. Greg Schiano is kind of like the godfather of look at the guys who had bad 40 times and recruit them to come to your program, and don't really worry about the one bad time or two, because there are guys that run a bad 40 at a camp or something like that and they get written off by all the bigger teams. Greg Schiano swoops in, he says, hey, really like your film, really like your tape, come on over here instead. They might not be the fastest players in the world, but they're good football players. He can bring them in, turn them into good college players, and sometimes they translate to the NFL. And I mean, Greg Schiano has made a living off of that at Rutgers. He made a living off of that at Rutgers when they were in the Big East, and he's made a living off of it, doing a good job being a bowl eligible team more often than not at Rutgers now. So, Jeff, any thoughts on those?
Yeah, I was going to say Rutgers goes into the next category, which is I call it my mixed bag in the middle recruiters. They're kind of, and they are in the middle, as you can see there, rows 9, 10, 11. Go to the previous table, though. Let's take a look at the Big Ten one. Rutgers specifically, I could just tell you, Chris Ash was a disaster, not only on the field, but recruiting-wise, it was really, really bad. You can see those classes, 3 of the 4 classes, 17, 18, and 17. Under Schiano, it's definitely improved here. It hasn't been great, but it's been good. Frankly, they come in at a decent 11.8 average, so they're 11th in the Big Ten in recruiting. Their national 5-year average is about 40, so they're recruiting like a top 40 program. But the win percentage for Rutgers last 5 years, which includes Schiano's time, is only 43%. Now that includes 4 or 5 years in the Big Ten East, right? So that's a big factor here in a lot of cases. But the bottom line is he needs to win more now. I mean, I don't mean big time, but he needs to win more now. Not to squeak into a bowl game, but get into that 8-4 level. And I think with the recruiting he's done, which has been 4 out of the 5 years in the 30s nationally. Actually, if you go over to national, since we're talking Rutgers here, 4 of the 5 years are in the 30s, right? So I really think, he should have the talent level, and he's got an experienced quarterback this year, which is vital for success in the Big Ten. But so far, Schiano has, been just middle of the road when it comes to recruiting, for sure. Let's talk about Wisconsin. Go to the Big Ten table. They used to be the model of consistency. They were like Iowa, but even probably a little bit better than in Iowa for years. But with Paul Chryst taking over in 2015, recruiting really jumped around a lot. If you look at this, it's, 11th, 13th, 9th, 7th, 5th, but then back to 12 and 15. So jumping around a lot. Under Fickle, he's had the 7th best class 2 years ago, and then this most recent class 9th. So then that's good. Still kind of middle of the road a little bit. The winning percentage of the last 5 years is 55%. It's been brought down by the fact that Fickle is 12 and 13 in his 2 years in Madison, which is really bad. He took a gamble on the air raid offenses, which we all know under Phil Longo that didn't work. And so, I think the hope for Wisconsin is Fickle is recruiting well. And that, frankly, that's why Wisconsin fans still have been patient with him despite being frustrated. It's why the administration of Wisconsin is going to be patient as well. He needs to hope that Jeff Grimes, the new offensive coordinator from Kansas, return to the power running game, play strong defense, return to their roots. Hopefully that will produce some better results, but they face a really tough schedule. But clearly, Wisconsin, middle of the road. Another middle of the road team is Michigan State, and they've been on a roller coaster ride the past 6 years thanks to the sad Mel Tucker saga. It really is interesting because prior to that, for 13 years, they were the model of consistency under Mark D'Antonio, right? He did kind of what Barry Alvarez almost did for Wisconsin when he came on board. He recruited well, but not great, established a great culture, and won a lot of football games. If you look at Michigan State under D'Antonio from 2016 to 2020, 5th, 10th, 13th, middle of the road recruiting. But if you coach well, you can get really good results with that. Mel Tucker came in, and once he got settled, he had the 5th best class and then the 6th best class in 2 years in the Big Ten. And nationally, those were top in the 20s, I believe, for Michigan State under Tucker. And then the allegations hit, everything fell apart. They had the transition to a new coaching staff, and that saw Michigan State have a 13th ranked class in 2024. And so, really all this coaching, unsettled coaching is just going to just hamper your recruiting and set your program back for years. And the 5-year winning rate reflects that. They're only winning at 48%, which for Michigan State compared to what D'Antonio did, that's very disappointing. Jonathan Smith has a great reputation, but it's a little bit worrying. Their Big Ten rank in this most recent class was 16th. That's 56th nationally. That's not good. Now, you got the transfer portal, which can be a factor, but we talked about this. High school recruiting, if you want long-term success, you're going to have strong high school recruiting. So that raises some questions in my mind on Jonathan Smith. I know it's just 1 year, but that really surprised me that he hasn't done better. Maybe they haven't aligned NIL resources. I'm not sure what's going on there, but certainly Michigan State is one of the 3 in the middle of the road. JR, any comments on those 3?
Yeah, my big thing with Michigan State is they basically tried to do what Indiana did, bring in a new coach, have him bring players with him, and have that work out. And unfortunately for them, it didn't work out, right? You look at the recruiting in the Big Ten the past 2 years, Michigan State 13th and 16th, Indiana 16th and 14th. I would assume if we go over here nationally, it's pretty similar, 42nd, 56th. Indiana is actually, a little bit worse, 65th and 45th. But this is what Indiana is doing right now, right? They're getting some good recruits, so 45th is better than what they were at before, but overall they're not focusing on recruiting as much because they're going to the transfer portal. Michigan State kind of doing the same thing. Their issue is they did not perform this season. They were 5-7, I think they were. So, when you're Indiana and you go 11-1, make the college football playoffs, you're going to have a whole lot more momentum. That's going to help them out not only in recruiting, probably this next cycle, but also in the transfer portal. Rutgers, again, kind of mentioned them before. This is what Greg Schiano does. He's not going to have the highest recruiting ranks, but as you can see here, he has gotten higher before them, and it's because as the reputation grows and as things as the scouts and stuff like that find out more, they're going to say, oh, okay, even if this guy didn't have the best 40 time in the world, Rutgers still wants him. Maybe we need to go circle back on that guy. And Greg Schiano was known for that even before he got there in 2021. So it made sense. And then as far as Wisconsin goes, recruiting is kind of saved Luke Fickell from what we read and from what we look at. Them getting outside the top 40 and then almost outside the top 60 to being 23rd, 27th. Seems like Wisconsin giving him an extra year extension. They're willing to wait. They're willing to be patient. They might be willing to wait. They might be willing to be patient. I just don't know if the fans are. The fans might not be as encouraged by the recruiting rankings as maybe the Wisconsin staff are or the Wisconsin administration is and stuff like that. So we'll see if it can turn into something for Luke Fickell. I hope they make it through this season with a healthy quarterback all year because I want to see what Luke Fickell looks like with a with a healthy quarterback because that seems to have really hurt them the past 2 years.
Yeah, definitely. Just that, Jared, did you want to hit a few comments?
No, not really. Max is pointing out transfer portal performance versus potential. Yeah, I agree there. You know, the transfer portal is a big factor in this for certain teams. Let's see. Pit Snipe Husker says just pulled up Rutgers schedule. Iowa, Minnesota, Purdue, Maryland are games they should win for sure. Washington, Illinois, question mark. I don't know. Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon should beat them. Yeah, I mean, Rutgers, I don't know about Iowa. I'd kind of put a question mark for them too, just because Kirk Ferentz does in Minnesota. I put a question mark for them too. But Purdue and Maryland, those should be wins. And then, Rutgers should get at least one of Iowa, Minnesota, Washington, Illinois. If it's a good year, 2 or 3, but you're not going to win all 4 of those. And then, yeah, Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon. Yeah, Greg Schiano is a good coach, but at the same time, he's not recruiting anything elite or anything like that. So
Yeah,
makes it hard for some of those tougher teams.
disappointment for Rutgers was this past year is when they had really the cake schedule. I believe they had the second easiest next to Indiana in the Big Ten.
Yep.
And they did have injuries for sure, but people were hoping for 8-4, maybe even 9-3. People were talking about Rutgers maybe being the surprise team, and it just didn't happen. So, but I do think I do think he's a good coach. I do expect, but we've talked about this in the past. The unbalanced schedule and the luck of the draw on the schedule in the Big Ten is really going to dictate seasons for people, right? I mean, and fans really need to factor that in. That schedule that I was seeing, Rutgers has a significantly tougher schedule than they had last year. That's for sure.
Right. And Nebraska's got to do it this year. Right now, they have the easiest rated schedule in the Big Ten. So this is going to be their year to do it. They got to do it. We'll see. So, Kinetic is here. Kinetic, hey, what's up, Kinetic? Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Bo Glue, there you go. I'll say that hashtag for you. Thanks for being here, man. All right, Jeff, what's next?
Let's go.
Last one.
We got our last 3. We're heading for home. We're going to talk about what I call the bad recruiters. Just flat out, they're not good at recruiting. That's the dark tan. Let's go to the
you
Big
could be
Ten
a little
side.
bit more positive, Jeff. You could say like room
I'm
for
gonna give some positive.
Maybe.
I'm glass half full. I'm Big Ten Jeff and glass half full Jet at the same time. Believe
okay.
Jeff at the same time.
Okay.
But go to the other Big Ten table. There you go. So first, Indiana. Basketball school, but now becoming a football school, I guess, based on the performance on the field. 5-year average Big Ten recruiting ranking of 13.8. That's actually 16th best in the conference. So 16th best, third worst, depending on how you look at it. Their 5-year national rank is 52. I'm going to round that 52. So not that great, but it mostly supports, they have a 46% 5-year winning percentage. It'd be way worse if you didn't factor in the 11-2 season they just had. But really, I mean, their results on the field reflect their recruiting, right? They kind of match pretty closely. What's interesting, Tom Allen did have mixed results, but had a couple really good years. He had the surprising 6-2 record in the 2020 shortened COVID season, but he never really parlayed that into good recruiting success. He had one really good class. That's 2022, ranked 6th in the Big Ten. Want to say that was in the 20s in the nation or something like that. But never really built the momentum off of what he did.
25th.
25th in the nation, right? But that's 1 year. You need to stack classes together. 1 year recruiting is not good enough. So Cincinnati, we all know, great success, had in the teens, the number of players that came over from James Madison to help him have that great year. You would at first think, oh, he had that great year. Why wasn't his recruiting rankings better than 14th this year? The reality is it takes longer than that to see success from a season. Recruiting is about relationships with high school coaches, building ties to recruits that you need to start recruiting very early. You can't come in late in the game unless you throw a pile of NIL cash at people, which does happen. But really, recruiting in high school, this is about a numbers game here, and it takes a while to build that momentum. I would be very surprised if next year you don't see better numbers, and it's going to come from having that great season from last year. So we're going to have to see how that goes. But Indiana's been third worst in the Big Ten. Let's go to Purdue. I know if I were a Purdue fan, I would wish, man, Jeff Brom, why did you leave us? You went 36 and 34 over 6 seasons. He actually had a couple really good national classes. Brom had in 2019 a class ranked 25th in the nation. In 2020, a class ranked 32nd in the nation. So he had a couple good classes back to back. Their 5-year Big Ten recruiting average is 14.4, so that's second to last in the conference. This is brutal. Over the last 10 years, Purdue has finished last in the Big Ten 5 times. 50% of the time in the last 10 years, they finished last. And then, not surprisingly, their win rate is 42%. Frankly, I would think it would have been worse than that, but Brom had some good years. He went 9-4 and 8-6 in a couple years back to back. Otherwise, that win rate would be a lot worse. What's interesting is Ryan Walters, of course, 2 years at Purdue only, was fired. He actually had a really good class in 2024, 8th in the Big Ten. That was 27th in the nation. But it didn't parlay into winning. I think it parlayed into a bunch of transfers right this year to other schools. Barry Odom coming in, he had the 98th ranked recruiting class in the nation, last in the Big Ten, but he didn't have a chance. It really wasn't his class, so it's unfair. The best hope is that he brought over a bunch of transfers from Las Vegas, UNLV. But too early to judge Odom in any way. But Purdue has just struggled mightily. And then our final team is Northwestern. Their 5-year Big Ten average ranking is 15.4. That's last in the Big Ten. They've never finished better than 14th in Big Ten recruiting the last 10 years. And yet, and then nationally, they're about 58th. What's amazing about Northwestern is they actually, won 2 Big Ten West titles in this time frame in which they're recruiting not very good at all. It's a nature of them being in, the offensively challenged Big Ten West for years. But it does speak to Pat Fitzgerald and his ability to get the most out of his players. They were a well-coached team. They had a lot of more experienced, older players playing, even though they weren't highly recruited. They were able to parlay that into reasonable success, kind of like in off and on years. But David Braun has his work cut out for him, man. I mean, it is not going to be easy because they're no longer in the nice, Big Ten West with that cushy schedule, facing offenses that don't know how to pass the ball. So they're my last one there, JR. Going to be could be tough times for David Braun, I think. What's your comments on our bad recruiters?
Yeah. Rudy, I think Rudy came in late here. He says we're looking at pre-Signetti era for Indiana. Yeah, so Rudy, what we're looking at here is the last column there on the side. That's the record percentage over the past 5 years. So judging that by recruiting rankings and stuff there. So obviously Signetti lifts that up with this year, but the previous years before that take that percentage down a little bit. So as the years stack and Signetti does better, that'll obviously improve, and we'll see if the recruiting goes with it or not. But just wanted to clear that up for Rudy. I saw him ask that. So excuse me. Yeah, so as far as I'm concerned, Northwestern, academic requirements there and stuff like that. Anybody who's at Northwestern has an uphill battle for them because they have more than just try to find good players in store for them there. That's why Pat Fitzgerald was so valuable with what he was able to do for that team. He understood the culture. He understood how to get players there. David Braun is going to have to, figure that out. It looks like he did the first year, winning 8 games, but this last year wasn't as good. 17th in recruiting both years. They're really going to have to develop their players if they want to make some more noise in the Big Ten. Purdue is very interesting. Ryan Walters, he had the 8th ranked class his first year there, then down to 18th when he gets fired. I mean, Ryan Walters brought in good players. He just couldn't do anything with them, and he didn't do a good job as a head coach, and he also didn't hire a good support staff for him. I mean, he had by the end of it all, he's a defensive guy playing or calling offensive plays, and he had old high school coach the year before calling offensive plays for him at 1.2. So just not a great situation there for Ryan Walters. But I mean, everybody wants to be Indiana, right? Everybody wants to get classes that are 16th, 14th, 17th in the Big Ten, and then go 11-1 and win the not win the, but get into the playoffs. Easy schedule helps with that, right? Easier schedule helps with that, but at the same time, you have to be good with your transfer portal. You have to be good with your who you're seeing there, and developing those guys for your system as well. Not just finding good talent, but finding talent that fits your system, and we'll do what you need them to do. So that's what you look at there.
Yeah, the other big difference between an Indiana and Purdue, it's interesting you said, because it's not just he pulled all those players from James Madison, but he basically brought over the entire staff from James Madison, except for the offensive line coach, Bob Bostad, who's a former Wisconsin guy, and he wanted to keep him because Bostad is excellent. So when you have your whole staff intact, the culture is established. The way we do things is established, and you can hit the ground running if you get good players, which they did from the transfer portal. That's why it worked. For Purdue and Ryan Walters, first-time coach, he's putting together his staff for the first time. He's trying to get his staff in sync. They can't hit the ground running at all, right? Because he's a first-timer, and the coaches are trying to get in sync, let alone syncing with the players. So, that's the power of the Cignetti formula, getting transfers in, but also bringing in an entire staff with you where everyone knows what's expected of each member of the staff, so you can really hit the ground running, and that's what Indiana did. So,
yeah, that's a really good point to bring up. Not only did he bring good players with him, but he had a solid staff with him as well. When you add all that together, that is kind of the recipe you get. Really good staff, brought really good players with you, and he didn't lose much of his staff either. In a favorable schedule that helped with that. I do want to point out with Indiana, they did get the cornerback. I almost forgot to mention him. I apologize. Byron, one of those two. Byron, I think it is Baldwin. He came in 4-star for Indiana. They were able to get him at the end of the cycle. That's huge for Indiana. It's not quite 5-star quarterback Dylan Raiola was for Nebraska or anything, but he's going to be a player that can help with connections and be kind of the example of, hey, we can bring you in, and if you're a highly rated prospect, we can develop you here, and you can turn into an NFL talent. So Cignetti's got him a player there that he can start showcasing to other teams or to other players, and that'll be what you want. So, all right, Jeff, man, I think
we didn't do it though, JR. We had a great podcast, but it didn't go under an hour. So we have so much great information, it's almost impossible to cram it within less than an hour. That's the issue, right? I mean,
that's the issue. When you have too much good content, you don't want to skip anything, and that's what we try to get you guys. So, Philip, I know you need it again, but man,
you want us to go further? 2.5.
You want us to go 2.5 hours? Maybe if they put 34.
Right, let's really break down these Washington recruiting stats now. Here we go.
Yeah. Don't worry, Philip. When they add 30 teams to the Big Ten, every single episode will be a 2.5 hour. That's kind of, when I started the show, that's what I wanted, right? Like, I would always get so ticked off listening to Big Ten shows, and they would say, "Oh, we're a Big Ten show," and I'd listen to a show, and I'm like, "Well, you mentioned like 6 teams. Like, how are you a Big Ten podcast and you only mentioned like 6 teams?" And it was the 6 best teams because those are the biggest fan bases. But I'm like, I get it. not a ton of Northwestern fans, but if I'm listening to a Big Ten podcast, I want to hear you mention Northwestern. I want to hear you mention Minnesota, Illinois. But yeah,
So
so
you
that's
raise up
that's
a
always
good
been
point.
kind of the premise of the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why JR and I had quote teamed up here and everything. I mean, I'm covering the full Big Ten. I mean, in everything I do. Now we might talk about some teams more than others, but the challenge is when you do that and you're talking 18 teams, it really is hard to keep it brief, right? So we will have some of the Thursday pods here will be shorter just because there will be less content to go into and everything. But we're going to bring to you guys a true comparison across the entire Big Ten, so you know how you stand. And we'll try to also keep it positive and bring up why you can be successful. I mean, Indiana, proved that anyone can be very successful in the Big Ten. So just want to wrap it up and just also mention full write-up on all this information is on bigjeffsfootball.com. Just go in there, click on the blog section, and we'll bring up all the different articles and all the both tables are in there and everything, full information. So it's chock full of good stuff there.
Yep, and if you go into the description, you'll find Jeff's article for this in there, and then you'll also find his website there and everything like that. So if you want to go check out Jeff's work, he does a great job. You can go check out his article right there in the description after the first paragraph. You'll find it there. So Jeff, we have a name for you now, Yankee Wolverine. He is deemed you the analytical king. How about that?
I like anything with king in it. Sounds pretty good to me. Czar, good Czar, king, either one. I'm
Well,
good.
you have your crown on, right? Your Big Ten
Yeah,
crown there. So
yeah. It's all about branding.
Yankee says, I know you are an IU B-ball fan and an Ohio State football fan. I'm an IU B-ball fan and a Michigan football fan. So figure that.
But I appreciate because I see your stuff on X too. You are a level. It's hard to find Wolverine and Buckeye fans that are level-headed, and you're one of them. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to find. It's hard to find level-headed people sometimes in some fan base, almost every fan base. But
True.
we'll find them eventually. They're there. We'll find them. All right. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing your data, your analytics, and everything else. And thank you everybody for listening, watching, however you consume the content. We really appreciate it. Even when there's no college football going on and it's months and months away, we still have stuff we're going to be bringing you. So every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time, you will find either me and Zack or me and Jeff here. You will also find at 9 a.m. on Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday morning Big Ten basketball episodes where you can get that content over there. Just me by myself most of the time, but I'll have other people with me from time to time as well. And Sunday night, I have not talked to Zack about this yet, but he is going to have Larry France from 24/7's Maryland site on with him to discuss the Maryland season. If he wants to go live, they will probably go live at 8 o'clock. If he does not want to, that'll probably be posted on Monday for you guys. So whichever one Zack wants to do, I'm going to leave it up to him. But if you see an episode scheduled for a Maryland 2024 recap, just know that will be Zack and Larry there. So thanks so much for joining us, everybody. We appreciate it. Have a good one.